The definition of the State of Israel as the nation-state in a basic law gives Israel's unique character a kind of quasi-constitutional status. In other words, when the court has to discuss issues related to the nature of the state, it will now be able to give proper weight to the collective rights of the Jewish people to a state of its own. As is known, there are those that criticize the lack of the mention of the word equality in the law. We will hear about that, I'm sure, later on. Even the supporters of the law, and I allow myself to say this on their behalf, support the equality of every citizen before the law. The dispute is due to the practical significance that the article may have in the basic law. For example, recently, a deputy attorney general recently instructed the heads of the Bedouin city of Rahat to devote hours of mixed swimming in their municipal swimming pool, contrary to what is customary in that community. What kind of equality is advanced by that kind of directive, and what guidelines will appear if there is an explicit provision for equality in a basic law? In addition, following the enactment of the basic law, representatives of the Druze community met with the Prime Minister and requested special mention for the community in light of its consistent loyalty to the State of Israel and their dedicated service of its soldiers in the IDF. Indeed, they deserve it. What are the chances that the court should allow such benefits if the basic law specifically mandates equality? So it's worthwhile thinking of such examples when talking about equality, and to remember that the interpretation of the term is elusive and subjective. Ignoring such conceptual difficulties leads to a superficial discourse and is no more than a show of piousness. Ladies and gentlemen, the drafting and adopting of a basic law is a serious matter, and so should the debate around it be. That is precisely why we decided to hold this conference, and we asked some distinguished speakers to take part in it. I wholeheartedly thank all those who have responded and agreed to do so. This is the place to remind those who are surprised that we have not invited Arab speakers, that we did invite them, but they chose not to participate, and I regret that. I'm convinced that today we will hear words of wisdom that will relate to the wording of the law, to what it contains and what it does not, to the concrete legal implications of every word that it has or that it should have, and thus we will create a frank and sincere discussion for the benefit of all, supporters and opponents alike. Thank you very much. And now I'm honored to call upon the Speaker of the Knesset member Yuli Edelstein to speak. Good morning. Thank you very much to the organizers and to you, Professor Koppel, for your important words. Distinguished guests, colleagues, my colleague M.K. Ohana, who is here with us, and all the other distinguished people in the audience, I would like to speak in praise of this, of our hosts here. For a long time, the parties of the coalition and extra-parliamentary organizations behaved like oil and water. And there was a reality in which the coalition, the ministers and the constituents of the coalition would make initiatives, and the extra-parliamentary organizations would explain why these initiatives are unworthy. And by the way, don't misunderstand me, in this oil and water behavior, there is something very democratic as well, and a pinch of criticism from the third sector of the first sector is quite acceptable, and it's something I actually quite like. However, the basic nation-state law, aside from all the important implications that Professor Koppel mentioned, is the result of a deep change in these relationships. It is the fruit of very close cooperation between public representatives and research institutes. It took 3 different Knessets, 10 years, because it had strong extra-parliamentary lungs that brought it oxygen even when the Knesset ran out of air going uphill. And that is an important message for our political culture, that the Kohelet Forum and other entities indeed have an important part. And I hope that this path will continue to produce important achievements of this kind. And thank you to all those who participated in the important discussions in the Knesset. Ladies and gentlemen, those sitting here certainly know that one of the most famous problems of the Knesset is that Israel's legislators have a great love for legislation. More laws come up for preliminary readings in the Knesset than any other country in the world, and that is not a contest that I think we should win. But there is a characteristic that is shared by the vast majority of these bills. There is no agreement, no consensus over them. For almost every proposed law, there are opponents and supporters, and it doesn't matter if it's on security, economy, society, or any other area. At the moment of the vote, some of the MKs will place their thumb on the red button and some on the green button, and some, as the Secretary General of the UN said at the vote in 1947 on Israel in the United Nations, those who abstain know what to do. But regarding the nation-state law, basic law, I must admit that I thought the situation would be somewhat different. I thought there would be a consensus that crosses parties, at least in the Zionist sectors of the Knesset plenum, because we're talking about a law that if it were read to the luminaries of Israel in the Middle Ages, Maimonides or Rabbi Judah Halevi, they would have jumped for joy, if I may say so. They so wanted to live in the land of Israel. They would have embraced this law with both hands. It is a law that if it were presented to the founding fathers of Zionism, Herzl, Jabotinsky, and others, they also would have grabbed it, because that's what they gave their lives to. A proof of the possibility of such a substantial majority we received partially during the meetings of the committee. MK Ohana led that committee, and also in the votes in the plenary. When there were defiant oppositions to the law, we got even to a vote of 92-3 or something like that to remove those reservations. I'm not looking to blame anyone or to point an accusatory finger at anyone and say, why didn't we reach that situation of 92-93 Knesset members in favor? But I confess that I was very regretful that when the vote was finally passed at the third and crucial reading, there was a substantial absolute majority, but not of that size. This law has opponents, many vocal opponents in and outside the Knesset, about what it contains and what it does not, about that which is self-evident and that everything in it is new. They found in it fascism, ultranationalism, racism, and bigotry. They placed a whole gallery of black slaves and called it the end, no less, of Israeli democracy. But the truth is completely and diametrically opposed. I know this because I grew up in a state in which human dignity was indeed trampled, and in which it really was a good idea to fear the tyranny of the government. No one can accuse me of supporting the destruction of democracy. If I were to sum up briefly the law, I would say that it is a first kind of operation for the transplant of a leg. Until now, Israel limped on one leg, its democratic leg. It's a very important leg, very central, if there can be a central leg. There is no one argues that you can live without that. But if you are left with only one leg, it's very difficult to walk. The basic law, nation-state Israel, gave us the missing Jewish constitutional leg and finally placed the corpus of basic laws in Israel on both its legs. Does that harm in any way the rights, the basic rights, basic human rights or civil rights in Israel as they are defined in basic law, human liberty and dignity? Not at all. Does it in any way diminish from the recognition of every human as free? Not at all, in my view. The basic law, nation-state, in no way runs counter to previous basic laws. It goes in addition to them. It is an expression of a nation that has returned to its homeland and renewed its national sovereignty, and very, very late determined its principles in this basic law, its important missions and identity, without harming any right or any citizen, but without being ashamed of our basic values and historic heritage. Is there anything more democratic than that? As the Speaker of the Knesset, it's important also for me to emphasize that this law is a sign of the proper workings of our Knesset. We did not pass it like thieves in the light with a tiny majority while ignoring the public discourse. We passed it after many years of a public discourse that was very broad and very lively. We passed it after a special committee headed by MK Amir Ohane that was established to advance it, sat for a very long time on every single word. And we passed it after, at the last moment, the Knesset listened to complaints that came from various sectors regarding the final wording and took the comments of the President of the State into account as well. I would not boast of this work of the Knesset if the nation-state was not now having to face the High Court of Justice and petitions there. And the High Court of Justice, for some reason, thinks it needs to strengthen the Knesset. That doctrine that talks about checks and balances has been replaced by a new judicial theory, which can be called links and strengthenings. The court, for some reason, thinks it needs to help the Knesset do its job. It sounds like an upside-down world to me, but that is the judicial reality in Israel today. So here, too, I will quote the former president of the High Court, of the Supreme Court, Aaron Barak. 10.5 years ago, Barak said at a conference of the Israel Bar Association that, and I quote, judicial review of a law does not harm the legislator. It strengthens the legislator and increases trust. This statement on its own is a statement that I can agree with. Review and criticism are always good things, and as we know, the light of the sun, and you can complete the sentence on your own. But in recent years, this judicial review has become a direct practice. When a person whom I respect very greatly says these things, former Justice Eliakim Rushton, he wanted to cancel or decided that the court should cancel a 2-year budget, and he said that the court does not harm the Knesset but is aimed at strengthening and protecting it of harm to its important work in Israeli democratic regime. The cancellation of a law, we had the cancellation of a law last year, and then Justice Noam Solberg said, and I quote, that judicial review of legislative processes is not adversarial against the Knesset, it's in favor of the Knesset, and it in no way harms the sovereignty of the legislator. On the contrary, it protects its strength and independence to legislate, end quote. In that case, I myself, and I'm speaking of that specific case, wrote a letter in which I asked the Finance Committee to once again discuss the bill, because it was clear to me that the discussion had been, how can I say it, a little bit too quick, but the committee did not do as I requested. I was told afterwards, here, look, if even the Speaker cannot do anything, that means that the Knesset can't manage on its own, and it needs to have the court at its side. But that's an optical illusion. I indeed could have done something. It was my decision not to apply yoter pressure. I had the authority as Speaker of the Knesset not to raise the law or not to bring the law to a vote in the plenary at all. But in the context of my broad considerations as Speaker, I decided to let the solution lie as it had been decided in the committee. How can one say that the forced cancellation of a law strengthens the Knesset? Because of these interventions seemingly in favor of the Knesset, we're facing a reality where those who are even considering the cancellation of a basic law, of this basic law, by the Supreme Court. But if there's anything that the Supreme Court has, that the basic law has proved, it's that the Knesset doesn't need the court to worry about it. It can worry about itself. It makes the most important decisions out of full awareness of the implications that emanate for them. It sketches out the future path of Israel out of full public responsibility and authority. It alone has the responsibility for that, and it only has the authority to do so. That is the strength of democracy, and heaven help us if it is taken from us, even out of a desire to strengthen democracy. It's not that the Knesset has completed its tasks, not at all. We must continue and add further basic constitutional laws. We must finally reach a consensus about the override clause so that it is effective. At the same time, we must make sure that Knesset members have enough supervisory and monitoring tools to monitor the work of the government. The Knesset must be independent of the government as well, but these are the tasks of the Knesset. What will strengthen the Knesset more than anything else is maximum freedom to deal with those things as it sees fit, as the Israeli public sees fit. Exactly as we did in the subject of the basic law nation-state, from the preliminary to the third leaning, to the glory of the Knesset, and I think also to the glory of the State of Israel. Thank you for your invitation, and I wish you a fruitful and productive day.
Thank you very much, Speaker of Knesset. And now we're going to make a small change to the agenda you have. I am now honored to ask the Minister of Tourism, Member of Knesset, Yariv Levin, to speak. Thank you very much, and good morning. We might even say that we can bless Shehecheyanu for making this conference today on the basic law nation-state that is now entering the Book of Laws of Israel. But we must say, as we open this conference, that the basic law nation-state is a retrospective law. It does not set anything new in stone. It only anchors the principles, the basic principles of the State of Israel that were so obvious when this state was established that they did not even need to put them in the Book of Laws. And it's important to remember that we have not invented anything new here. Rather, a series, a long line of rulings by the Supreme Court have set in motion a post-Zionist process of erosion of the basic Zionist principles and values of Israel in favor of ostensibly global principles. And this erosion has become an existential threat to the State of Israel as the Jewish homeland for the Jewish people. And this is well manifest in the verdicts and rulings given on legislation that was intended to stop Israel from being flooded by infiltrators, where universal rights, allegedly, of those who have come into this country illegally were favored over the rights of the citizens of Israel, while making more waves more prominent that will also impact our demographics and, yes, even the Jewish majority in the State of Israel. These rulings are a direct continuation of this approach of ignoring the Jewish aspect and nature of the State of Israel, such as in the example of the Kahdan verdict that took one of the values of Zionism, which is Jewish settlement, into inequality and into wrongdoing. And as for the constitutional weight of this basic laws as the nation state of the Jewish people, what was obvious to the people, to verdicts from years ago, has become an ongoing process, particularly in the last 2 decades, to something that is disputable, something that is questionable, something that is being minimized, something that is not at all obvious. And from that, we need to now state the obvious and actually put it in writing. The disconnection of the Supreme Court justices from the public in Israel brings to me, or leads to, a detrimental harm to the nature of the State of Israel. Since the establishment of the state, the parliament, the Knesset, has legislated laws in order to protect its nature as the Jewish homeland, but by gnawing at and eroding the roles of the legislators by the court, by the Supreme Court, there is now detrimental harm done to the nature of the State of Israel. It is easy to imagine what would happen if we were now to try and put in writing the law of return. The Supreme Court in Israel feels in recent years that it has all the authority and all the power. It can change world order and it can salvage the citizens of Israel from the government they have elected. Democracy in this context, some of the justices will be no more than just a recommendation for those who voted for this government, but not true authority to make decisions. The necessity of the basic law nation-state is particularly important at times when some seek, both within the country and outside it, to annul and to undermine the right of the Jewish people to its own country, the right of Israel to exist as the Jewish people's homeland and nation state. And we must say clearly that when we legislated this law, it was the right wing rather than the left that said that there are too many concessions made in it and that is too declarative. And as part of the process, we had to make some concessions and compromises. However, the final outcome is a very meaningful and practical, far-reaching practical aspect kind of law. And it is finally rolling back this post-Zionist process that we have been witnessing over the last 2 decades and more. I will give you several examples. The law places foundation for against illegal immigration into Israel, and also provides a legal infrastructure for directives that prevent uniting families of inhabitants of Gaza and the West Bank, directives that are currently only temporary provisions. And we have a High Court of Justice rulings that actually go against them. It also provides tools for Jewish settlements and providing financial incentives that will allow us to strengthen the Jewish settlement across Israel, as Zionism has told us to do from its inception. And above all, the law is trying to direct the court and also provides a mirror that reflects clearly the huge gap between the Supreme Court rulings and the values that they express and the basic values of the State of Israel. This reflection will further bolster the public demand that is ever growing to make huge changes in the legal system in order to return it to a more Jewish and Zionist track. I can say here very clearly, from a personal point of view, that perhaps the hardest battle I had to engage in over the years that we have tried to promote this law was the battle designed to ensure that the law will not mention the word equality or the principles of the Declaration of the State of Israel, the Scroll Declaration of the State of Israel. And I'm sure that we'll hear from some of the speakers who objected to this law. They'll probably argue about that, and I think I'd like to clarify why we did so. Of course, I completely accept the principle of personal equality between all citizens of Israel and certainly the principles of the Declaration of the State of Israel. However, let us not play naive. It is very clear that had we written these words in the law, the interpretation that the High Court of Justice would give them would be so that it would completely nullify the meaning of the law. And therefore we could not mention these principles in order to prevent the court from using it, the High Court of Justice from using it in a way that will lead us to a situation where the damage rendered by the law would have been greater than its benefit. On the day that the legal system will return to the place it assumed at the beginning of this state, and when the justices sitting in trial will be committed to the basic values that the State of Israel was established upon, and the legal system will return to a Zionist and Jewish track, as it was in its early years of the State of Israel, then certainly we will be able to include such values and principles in basic laws without fearing that they will be misused in legislation and in rulings, but rather with the hope that they will be used as intended and as written in the spirit of those who wrote the Declaration of the State of Israel, and will indeed reflect and express the basic intention that all citizens of Israel will be equal, but will provide the state with all necessary tools in order to ensure that this state will continue to be Jewish, with Jewish settlements and with Jewish life that is of meaning. And in this context, one must say, and it's important to emphasize, that the basic law nation-state is not enough in and of itself. If anyone on any side of the political map thought that, okay, maybe that's bad, but at least that's where it ends, I would like to inform them that it's not. At the end of the day, and that's what we must say very clearly, the need for this basic law resulted from the way that the justices over the last 2 decades have tried to dictate their way of seeing things and changing the values and basic principles of the State of Israel. And it's been proven already that some judges are willing to ignore the law in order to attempt and express their worldview as part of the verdicts and rulings that they write. And therefore, legislating this law does not exempt us from the need to create a series of steps in the legal system, including the way that we appoint judges and making a drawing a distinction between the law and how it's put to practice. And another aspect we must look at is the fact that during these very days, before our very eyes, something unprecedented is taking place that has never taken place in any legal system, which is one desperate claw by the legal system to try and preserve a dictatorial way of their enforcing their views upon the public. If they had until now taken the liberty of interpreting the law in ways that completely contradict the basic law, human dignity, we are now witnessing a new phase, which is a real and true revolution by a minority that has placed itself above the public and above any of the democratic regime instruments. Is it even conceivable that the court will decide not only which laws are compatible with legal norms, but which legal norms are acceptable to it and which are not? Has that ever happened in any democratic country? Did the Supreme Court in the United States decide that instead of ruling in conformity with the Constitution to annul bits of it? Can 32 members of Knesset decide without any discussion in the public discourse, without giving it any meanings, will undermine a basic law that was accepted by a majority of at least 61 members of Knesset, and after many years of a public discourse over several Knessets, the appeals against this basic law of the nation-state should have been rejected on the get-go because of lack of authority, without any discussion thereof, and by stating very clearly and loudly that Israel is a democracy, and in a democracy the sovereigns are the people through their elected officials, and they alone can decide what the legislative norms are and what the basic laws are. So I would like to call upon the justices of the Supreme Court to pull themselves together before they reel off the track and get to places that no democracy in the world dreams of going to. They must reject these petitions from the get-go. And I believe that if they do not do so, if they fail to do so, the Knesset will have to notify the court that it does not intend to respond to these petitions, and that the Supreme Court cannot take the place of the Knesset and annul a basic law that was legislated by it. And I will say that such a collision and contradiction between the various branches of the country and the government is not something we want, but it is something that must happen, because this is a test for Israeli democracy, and the choice is clearer than ever. We must respect the will of the people, or else we have a dictatorship that forces its ways on everyone else, against and in contradiction with the basic laws, and by abusing the legal system. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Minister of Tourism Yariv Levin. I am now honored to ask the Minister of Justice, MK Ayelet Shaked, to speak.
Good morning to everyone. Because the Speaker of the Knesset and the Minister of Tourism spoke before me, and I assumed they would be talking about the law and its details, I will focus my talk on the point where Minister Levin ended, and I'll talk about the basic aspect of amending a law. It's told of the people of Chelm that they wanted to illuminate their city in the dark winter nights. What did they do? They gathered wood throughout the summer. They built huge barrels. They filled the barrels with water, and one night in the middle of the month, when the moon was full, every resident of Chelm placed his barrel under the sky in order to catch the full moon. As soon as the moon was caught in the barrels, they sealed the barrels and covered them on all sides so that not a single ray of light would escape. We have the moon. That's what the people of Chelem said to themselves. The winter nights will no longer be dark. All that needs to be done is to open the covers of the barrels, and the light captured in them will illuminate the dark lights. The argument that favors the right of the Supreme Court to cancel a constitutional law because it's not constitutional sounds like it comes from Chelem. It works from the assumption that moral darkness will cover everything that's been done here for 70 years, and that Israel's constitution will turn it into a non-democratic regime. We will still be able to illuminate the darkness with the moonlight that we captured during the summer nights. The basic principles of democracy that we seek on are reflected in the constitutional barrels and will save us from ourselves. Based on the view that sees this doctrine as the way to save our democratic regime, the people are corrupt. Its representatives in the Knesset are also corrupt. Even the government is corrupt. And the police that will enforce the new laws are of course corrupt. Everything will change, and everything we've known until now will be lost. The catastrophe awaits us. But don't worry. Even on such a dark night, the court can save us. All the maladies of society that will cause us one day to lose our democracy will not touch the court. From the outside, there will be a storm, but the court will illuminate the dark night. And that's what we learned on a beautiful summer night. The 15 justices of the Supreme Court will be enough to save the situation. That's why they were elected, isn't it? The Supreme Court will decide that our new constitution is not constitution, and we'll immediately go back to ourselves. The crooked path will become straight, and we will be saved from the constitutional nightmare that we dreamed. How simple and how stupid. Except that the doctrine of the constitutional amendment of that which is not constitutional is dangerous. It could cause any regime to collapse, and the separation of powers, which is the basis of our governmental system, will be destroyed, and instead they will try to illuminate the darkness with the moon captured in the barrels. And they'll try to save us from with a drug that doesn't work, from a disease that will not come. The constitutional revolution declared in the mid-1990s gave authorities to the Supreme Court or to the courts, which the legislature never planned to give in, contrary to what President Barak said, and this is unparalleled in any Western country. This is not what happened in the United States in Melbourne v. Madison, which President Aaron Barak likes to refer to, or nor in other countries in which when he used judicial review without any legislative anchor. In the new authority that the court arrogated to itself was based on that consensual constitution. Here we never passed a consensual constitution. Why? The technical reason why we don't have a constitution until Barak created it with his ruling was the Harari decision that decided that basic laws would not serve as a constitution except after all the basic laws had been legislated. But even more important is the fundamental reason why we don't have a constitution and why we needed the Harari Compromise in the first place. The reason is was that we were unable to agree precisely, without making do with general formulations, what our basic values are. If we had consensual, accepted basic values, why has it been so difficult so far to formulate a constitution? The constitutional revolution tried to create a constitution ex nihilo, and then to move on to the next step of exercising constitutional review based on that constitution. So the idea of canceling a basic law that in their view is not constitution, but it is not based on any consensual values. The only ones we have are the ones we have agreed on based on our basic laws. And here the absurdity is underscored. Anyone who wants to cancel a constitutional law by saying that it's not constitutional, then that's the absurd, because they will be canceling those very values that we have agreed upon through a long process with compromises and agreements, and that is because of the superiority of what are claimed to be our basic values. But in fact, what we are talking about are values about which there has never been a consensus, values that no one has formulated in a clear fashion and that have never been examined by the public eye. Here too, the basic law nation-state enjoys enormous preference to the laws passed in the 90s, because it is the first basic law whose focus is the basic values of the State of Israel, and it was passed after the Knesset discovered what the normative position of the court gives to basic laws. So we're told that the very title that something is a basic law is not enough to protect it from review or cancellation, because the procedure, because basic laws are legislated like ordinary laws without a referendum and so on. But here we must ask, why didn't this argument come up when the law decided to grant the basic law of the 1990s the highest normative constitutional value of a basic law without any procedural difference in the legislation of the basic law, without a special majority and or anything else? How? Here the logical fallacy cries to the skies. And Justice Shin argued exactly this against Justice Barak in the Mizrahi ruling. The procedure of the legislation is not different, he said, and therefore the essence cannot be different, except that Barak rejected this argument completely. What is different now? Why today do Barak's disciples raise the same claim that he rejected in the past? Have the legal principles change, or is the content of the basic laws different? I said a few days ago that I would reject further arguments. Academic articles of different kinds are currently being quoted that there is a possibility of an amendment of a constitutional law because it's unconstitutional. But some very non-serious people are using these arguments for political purposes. And I say to them with full confidence, there is not a single Western democracy that rejects constitutional principles based on the system. Germany and the Czech Republic are not relevant for our discussion. The judicial review for constitutional laws are not there because of nebulous principles as they try to do in Israel. The constitutional principles are examined in those countries only because of the fact that they might run counter to those clauses which are called eternal, which are the flesh and blood of the consensual constitutional text that the constituting assembly determined, and that they cannot be changed. And so they have a far greater value. And in Austria, and once again, completely in contrary to those who expressed an opinion on this subject, the judicial review there is examined in procedural terms, not essential terms. It only relates to the required majority, and it relates only to an amendment or change to the Constitution. And it was decided here also in the Bergman case in 1969 regarding the majority needed to cancel the law, and there's no argument about that. We do not have in our legal system procedural demands or eternal clauses of that nature, and so the desire to cancel a law is based on the basic system and its principles, but those are principles which don't exist. And which are the countries that we are asked to join? Which are those countries that can cancel constitutional amendments because of basic principles that only the judges are familiar with? Bangladesh, Colombia, Honduras, and India. India is a huge country with an ancient, unique culture that is of great importance. With all due respect, it is not a constitutional system that Israel needs to learn from in this context. It is a state that for many years had institutional discrimination in which there is huge inequality and cases of injustice, and it is taking steps now to become a Western democracy of the kind we're familiar with. It's a bad joke. But there are other countries. The United States, for example, in 1939 rejected this idea completely, and in Coleman v. Miller, it decided that constitutional amendment is a political act from A to Z, and the court can have no possibility of interfering in it.
Ireland, in many rulings from recent years, some of them from recent years, has rejected this notion, repeating the principle the United States has stated. And of course, in other places, the same is true. But we don't even have to go far to the common law countries to learn. In our case, a little bit of common sense will suffice. Because no one argues that Israel does not have a proper constitution. And even as Barak thought in the Bank HaMizrahi verdict that the basic laws have more of a status than regular laws, understands and knows that the constitutional enterprise has yet to end. We have only just legislated the basic law of nation-state, and we want to also have a basic law of legislation. And in future, maybe there'll be other chapters. From the left, they want to anchor civil rights, and from the right, we want to validate and give greater meaning to property, to rights of property that are trampled. So in the absence of a whole entire constitution, we cannot determine which chapter of the evolving constitution is actually in line with it or not, because there is no constitution, so we cannot even talk about one basic law or another not being in line with the constitution. We're not changing the constitution, we're not even amending it, we are only still just establishing it and putting it together. And that should have been true even to Barak's outlook, and he himself said something very similar a few years ago. But as in many things, times change, and now the court is trying to take away the rights of the Knesset. In recent decades, they have taken away our rights, and they have given greater power by interpreting the law too broadly. And now it seems that there are those who are petitioning and are trying to also take away the legal eraser. A court that erases legislature from the Knesset is becoming partner in putting together and establishing the constitution. But in a democracy, that does not work that way. The Knesset is supposed to formulate the constitution, and the court is supposed to rule in accordance with it. And just a few more things I'd like to say in the broader context of the relations between the court and the Knesset. The Dred Scott it seems as if that the court is of more status of more importance than the Knesset. It's as if the Knesset is hanging people on lampposts and the court is going one by one and taking them off. The United States Court about Dred Scott, the black slave, stated that the slave is the property of the white owner, or the abolition of slavery. Which one is the one we should be following? There are many such examples, but we don't need to go 10,000 miles to the west and go back in time. These deviations from the narrative that someone is trying to anchor, saying that the Knesset is taking away rights and the court is trying to give them back, is everywhere. We now have a fair process in place, and we're trying to actually protect the rights of convicts and so on, and felons. Why are people thinking that the Knesset is trying to revoke rights? Is it maybe easier to conduct yourselves from that kind of point of view? And before we wrap up, let's go back to the people of Chelm, when they discovered that the light of the moon is not awaiting them in their wooden barrels. What do you think they did when they discovered that their dark winter nights will remain as dark as ever? I would like to believe that they decided to take responsibility and understand and realize that if they do not illuminate the night skies with active civil involvement and investing resources in creating lighting on the street, no tricks will help, because no magic potion will stop them from their own inactions and failures. And I would like to believe that we too understand that no one will protect our values other than ourselves, that if we be corrupt as a society, no one will come to our aid. That only political involvement and active participation in political life will create a better country for us all and will protect in practice the basic values that we believe in and that we have set for ourselves. In such a country, and I am convinced the state of Israel is such a country, democracy continues to prosper. The sovereignty of the people, and I would like to add the responsibility of citizens and politicians, has always been the democratic foundation, the distilled democratic foundation, and has remained so and will forever be that way. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Minister of Justice. I am now honored to ask the head of the opposition, member of Knesset, Tzipi Livni, to speak. Thank you very much, and good morning to you all. I thought I was coming to a discussion on the values of the State of Israel rather than on what the High Court of Justice can or cannot do. And that is what I'm going to talk about here. And I wanted to say to the Minister of Justice, who made jokes about anyone who thinks otherwise, like they're Chelm people, that recently, apparently the city of Chelm really does exist to this day, and a band of non-Jews came there that is trying to keep up and to preserve the Jewish culture there. And they're a musical band, and they sang Jewish songs, and they connected to Judaism that includes loving thy neighbor and loving converse. That is the kind of Judaism that I would like to be part of Israel's values, rather than a Judaism of exclusion, of hatred that does not look after people's rights. And I don't want to talk about this clause or another clause in the law and to talk about comparative law and to go into verdicts and rulings of the past. Let us just take off the masks, stop being hypocrites, and say very simply, what do we want the state of Israel to be like? How do we want it to be? The test I have is the single one. Do we want Israel to be a Jewish and democratic state in the sense of the state of the Jewish people that has equal opportunity and right for every one of its citizens, as determined in the Declaration of Independence. And if anyone is in favor of that, whether you're on this side or on that side in terms of political adversary, if you're on my side, you're on my side. That's okay if that's what you believe. But if you want, or anyone who wants, to turn the state of Israel into a state that is either only democratic, where there is no expression of the right of the Jewish people to their country, or anyone who wants to take the state of Israel and turn it into a state that is only a Jewish one, and where it will not be democratic in the sense of a democracy, of a system of values, and not just a majority rule where the majority can do whatever they want. They are my political adversaries, and I will use the political tools that are available to me in the Knesset and elsewhere to convince others that what they are doing is to take this agreed set of values that was agreed upon when this state was established and tearing it apart. The Minister of Justice talked about the fact that we haven't reached agreements or understandings. There was a single moment in the history of the Jewish people where one after another came and signed this document. And it began, by the way, with the rabbi blessing it. And it went on to everyone coming, the ultra-Orthodox, the communists, the social parties, and the revisionists. Those who were the disciples of Jabotinsky, who had all sorts of comments on the Declaration of the State of Israel, but they said, how great this day is. Let us now be united around certain principles and basic values that recognize the right of the Jewish people to their own homeland. That is what they fought for, and established at the same time that in this nation-state of the Jewish people, there will be equal rights. What happened with the basic law of the nation-state is not to transplant a leg, but it is to sever the other leg. And that is what the discussion is all about. Please do not disrupt. And I will make this job very easy for those who really do truly and genuinely support the view that Israel is both democratic and Jewish. Those who say we only added a leg, we're not anti-equality. Okay, so come and join us. In a week or two, there will be a bill in the Knesset. Do you think that equality should be in the basic law of human dignity? I added it there, so vote for it. You think we need both legs, a Jewish and democratic state with equality for all? Are you in favor of the Declaration of the State of Israel? Well, vote in favor of it, because that's another bill that I have put that I have offered. That the Declaration of the State of Israel and the Scroll of Independence will be the preface, will be the preamble to the Constitution, and since the true constitutional meaning will be attributed to the value system, both equality and a Jewish homeland. And anyone who objects to that, surprisingly, in the Knesset are two parts of the House. Yes, the joint party that have a problem with the Jewish aspect of Israel, and the government of Israel who has a problem with equality, no less. Now, if you think that I am just blaming people or accusing people for nothing, well, this test will return, so you'll always be able to see how they vote. But this test already took place in two bills of Benny Begin and myself that say something very simple. Israel is the nation-state of the State of Israel with equal rights for all. And yes, the government voted against it, together with a joint party. And those who don't accept the Scroll of Independence don't now ask me what the role of the courts of Israel is, because all I'm trying to do is preserve the values of the Scroll of Independence, and we're not even sure what democracy is. We're in a dispute over that as well, because if the Minister of Justice is saying that the democracy is the majority rule and nothing else, then we have a problem with the view and understanding of what a democracy is. The minister, Yariv Levin, is saying that if after we appoint the judges that we want, then I will be willing, he said, to add the word equality, then first of all, let's start with the fact that you should put into, as the committee of appointing judges, the representative of the opposition in the Israel, and you will not prevent the representative of the opposition to be there on the committee, because they are in a minority, but at least they should be there. But Yariv Levin's promise, to vote then in favor of equality, reminds me of Bibi Netanyahu's promise to Amir Ohana that he will also vote in favor of the law that will allow gay couples to go through surrogacy. And that won't happen either, because the government of Israel has a problem, a true problem with equality. I remember just a few years ago when this issue came up, and Netanyahu and I agreed to appoint Professor Ruth Gabizon so that she will do the background work. She's not someone suspicious in this hall, I think, of any desire to take the state of Israel to places that are horrible and horrendous. And I remember the first discussion we held. It was attended by Yariv Levin, Minister Elkin, and Ayelet Shaked. Minister Elkin said, no way, there will not be equality. We want to make sure that Israel is a Jewish state, and equality is not part of the equation. Yariv Levin said what he said today, give me the committee for appointing judges, and then I don't care about anything else. And the Minister of Justice at the time did not engage yet, or did not take all of these examples, or listened less to what the Kohelet Forum says and to her own logic, and said, you know what was the problem with a state for the Jewish people that is Jewish and democratic and that is equal? I wish she would have listened to Ruth Gabizon more, and rather than turning to listening to the extremists in your party and in your forum. And Minister Yariv Levin also is correct. And when he says that this law is null and void, or it's empty, it's not an empty law, but it's not the kind of law that the government wanted, because the law that government wanted began with it being the law according to which all other laws will be interpreted, including the basic law of human dignity, and that will be the law that will determine Israel being a Jewish state and not a democratic one. And when I asked to do what the basic law of human dignity did, because this law, which is the leg that you're saying is the democratic law, says in its introduction that it anchors the values of the state of Israel as both Jewish and democratic, that the intention is to protect the values of the state as declared in the Declaration of the State. So I said, you know what, let's also begin the basic law nation-state with this introduction, that the basic law nation-state is also part of this notion that Israel is both democratic and Jewish. Let us mention the Declaration of the State of Israel and the Scroll of Independence in the law, and they were not willing to do that. And it's not a coincidence, because this law really is part of the Zionist Council in a debate that I was also attending, and I thought it was very true, and it's a good thing to do, to anchor the state of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state, and as a Jewish nation state in law. And I don't, and when they tried to attempt to making this law good, they had actually stained the law of return, and that is a law that is very appropriate, and even this terrible High Court of Justice determined that it's a legitimate law. It does not talk about the equality between the citizens of Israel themselves, or in making the equality unequal, as does the nation-state law. And I thought it was a good idea until I saw the draft of the law, and I saw that they're talking about a Jewish law, a Jewish state, but just as a technicality, it also has a democratic regime. And I said, wait, let's say Jewish and democratic together. And they said, no. That we have to object to. So that is the true story before us. Who is in favor of a state that is both Jewish and democratic? Who is in favor of a state that is only Jewish and that is not democratic, or that at least democracy is not a true value of? Why am I so certain that they cannot join equality, this government, because it is part of their worldview, their outlook. Because the ultra-Orthodox cannot accept equality for women or equality for the LGBT community because it goes against their worldview. And the Prime Minister likes to pay them with a constitution, unfortunately, as a currency. And the Beit Yehudi, who are so worried, I didn't hear the Beit Yehudi, I heard Yariv Levin being so fearful of the Jewish majority with all these refugees coming in. But the annexation processes are the true danger to the State of Israel and to the Jewish majority in it. So those who advocate annexation will also make sure that there will not be equality in this binational state that we will have, in order to make sure that it remains a Jewish nation-state without being equal. And that is the move in place, and it is my duty to go against it and to place this truth on the table. And it's not just a discussion about a certain clause of the law. Of course, most of the clauses of the law have already been set in legislation. I do not object to the fact that Israel is the nation-state of the Jewish people. I will be the first to convince the rest of the world, and I have been the first to convince the rest of the world that the State of Israel is a Jewish state, and therefore the Palestinian refugees cannot have a right to return, and that is contained in the letter of President Bush to the Prime Minister of Israel. But how did I do it? I went to the United States, I sat with the U.S. Secretary of State. I talked to her about my parents and how they fought for the establishment of the state, how they believed in the values and in the link of the Jewish people to Israel, but in the need to have a both democratic and Jewish state. And I explained that unlike the UN decision that Israel is racist, that's not true. We have an equality of rights between all citizens. And with that, I went one state after another and I explained to the heads of states that having a Jewish state is not racist. It is our right to have a Jewish homeland. But within this country, there will be equal rights for all, and that is how I gained the international support. So if anyone here is worried about what's happening around the world, this law is exactly the way and the means. And I'm not talking about BDS. It is the greatest heartache that this law has made for the Jewish people. I am now returning from the United States. Jews who are in support of the State of Israel, who send their children to be lone soldiers in the IDF, protecting Israel on campuses in the United States, are saying, why? How can we identify with a country that gives us, as liberal Jews, the feeling of exclusion? So the nation-state of the Jewish people is not something of just being elected and we're in government so we can do whatever we want. And equality, instead of being a bone of contention, could be a source of unison, of uniting us. It can connect the Jewish nature with a democratic aspect. Because equality doesn't mean we only take the American Constitution. Love thy neighbor, that's us. So what's the problem in saying so in legislation? But you have turned this nation-state law into this tool and instrument that will try to outline me and my friends as traitors, as if we oppose the Jewish state, as if we are not nationalist enough. And I will stop this debate and I will tell the government of Israel that in the 70th anniversary of the State of Israel there will be one bill. Are you in favor or against the Scroll of Independence? Because what was good enough for our founding fathers of the state, including Menachem Begin, including the disciples of Jabotinsky, who said every individual is a king, and talked about democracy and talked about rights and talked about the deep meaning of minorities who will be living in the nation-state of the Jewish people. What was good enough for them should also be good enough for the State of Israel and the government of Israel today. And if our government is incapable of voting for a country that has both of these legs, all of these legal mumbo-jumbo is not good enough. We have really just lost Zionism, and against that I will fight. Thank you very much.
I'd like to ask everyone to please take their seats. I don't want to advertise anything, but the heading of YNET has some of the headlines from this important conference, and it talks about, there's a headline a few rows down that talks about a stone that was found with the inscription Jerusalem. For the first time in letters that we can read, a stone found near the International Conference Center at this entrance to Jerusalem. So that appears to be connected. Those two items appear to be connected. And now we'd like to get started. At this session, in this session, we'd like to talk about what happened to the self-evident, or in other words, how did the public discourse on the nation-state law become one of the most populist discourses we've seen? How is it that the nation-state law, and it's clear that the Israeli consensus supports its main points, was the target of such criticism? Why is the left repudiating a law which was originally proposed by Knesset members from the left center? Why does this law provoke such strong emotions until a newspaper that I'm familiar with, that I write in, it's published it with a black flag next to it? Does it have something to do with the radicalization of the center-left that we are seeing? Or was it a problem in the legislative process itself and in the pressures and the political compromises that led to the removal of clauses that appeared in the original formulation of the law? Or perhaps there was a failure to explain it properly? We have four important people here from four different directions. Haim Ramon, former justice minister and Knesset member. Yuval Diskin, former head of the Israel Security Agency. Attorney Tzvi Hauser, former cabinet minister of the Forum, Kohelet Forum, and Dr. Gadi Taub of the Hebrew University. Dr. Gadi Taub was quoted saying that the basic law nation-state was born because of Haaretz newspaper and the left. And what I would like to ask him when in his comments in a few moments, in your opinion, isn't the nation-state law a positive act on its own, or is it a defensive act? And before Dr. Taub arrives, I'd just like to mention that I was privileged to be a student of his many years ago. He is an outstanding teacher, but especially tough. If you were even 1 minute late, he wouldn't let you in. So now it's my turn not to take revenge, but to be very strict about the clock. And this is the same for all the speakers, of course. We'll be very careful. In the first round, very strict. 10 minutes for each speaker. In the first round, I will be using a timer, and it will be, especially because we're behind schedule, will be very tough on that. It's not that I was so tough. She was just a very, very bad student. Wow. Wild. And I saw in many cases that you were right. I don't deny it. I suspect that this applause won't be especially helpful. I'll try to speak slowly and clearly. I was among those who were not opposed to the content of the law, but didn't think that it needed to be legislated, because I think that it won't help the purpose for which it is intended. And on the other hand, in the manner in which it is formulated, it would cause harm by polarizing the discourse in Israel and also externally. So it was clear. So this quote about the left and Haaretz was something I said in the heat of the moment in a podcast with Ravit Hecht in Haaretz, and I think it's true. I think what I said in other places was what we heard here. This law is aimed to halt the imperialism of the Supreme Court, which used the basic law, human freedom and dignity, and it started to endanger, and I agree that that happened, the national character of the State of Israel. My great anxiety was the subject of family unification, and it almost passed. They almost legislated here a right of return for Arabs based on that other basic law. But that's not the right way to do it, this basic law. We heard at length why the word equality was not included, because the Supreme Court would do this or that. Well, since when is the Supreme Court find itself restricted by the wording of the law? There is a ruling, there's a law that says that someone who is opposed to the Jewish and democratic character of the state cannot be a member of Knesset, and the Supreme Court ruled in complete opposition to the wording of the law. So if you think the Supreme Court is dependent on whether or not the word equality appears, you're wrong. So I've had many arguments already back in the time in Dichter when it was originally born, and after it was passed with Amir Ohana regarding the wording of the law. In constitutions, when you announce or declare the character of the state, I want to point out that there's nothing discriminatory at all in this law. The law states that which is self-evident. It's true. But when you write, and let me quote 1C of the law, for those who aren't familiar with the exact wording, the realization of national rights is exclusive to the Jewish people. That's a given in all nation states. But when we formulate in that way, we give weapons to our enemies. We're saying that the rights, national rights, are unique or exclusive to the Jewish people. But until you explain that, you're like me. You appear on television abroad, in other languages, and they keep repeating it. That this law created discrimination between Jews and non-Jews. Until you finish explaining it, you've missed. If Alan Dershowitz says that it makes it difficult for him to defend the State of Israel, I don't know why he said it, but Alan Dershowitz, the author of the book The Place of Israel, if we're making things difficult for him, but then it won't, those who are against us in any case, it won't convince one. But when I'm talking about those who are for us, the swing votes, as it were, we are giving them an easy tool to attack us with, and the demagogic claim that Israel is an apartheid state. I'd like to explain again that the constitutional structure of Israel as the nation state of the Jewish state is no different from other democracies and meets the standards that are accepted for democracies, and especially in regard to minorities. The EU formulated a paper that is called the Basic Paper for the Protection of Minorities, and the idea is to protect national minorities, and it's clear that national minorities can't be part of the national determination of the state, but rather to enable them to protect their separate identity in the nation state. And that's what the State of Israel allows. In that sense, it's ultra-democratic. It's not only that we allow, for example, minorities to learn in their own language, but we allow a party that negates our right to self-determination in our own parliament to be elected. We allow a Knesset member who participated in a flotilla and fought IDF soldiers to be a member of the Knesset. I'd like to tell you that if Hanin Zoabi had participated in a flotilla against the United States government and fought Navy SEALs of the U.S., she would have gone to jail. So Israel is ultra-tolerant. It allows education systems that teach things that I don't know any other democratic country would allow. But externally, we have articles that can be used against us. In many countries, in their constitution, if they have a constitution, there is a paragraph or a clause on the national character of the state, and it says without derogating the rights of minorities, or the word equality appears, or something similar. The idea that if this word had become part of the basic law, that's what would have given the court the ability to undermine the legislator and arrogate for itself the right of a constitutional court. And I agree with what was said here earlier, that the fact that it even has agreed to accept standing for discussion of the nation-state law, and that is something that is unheard of. You know that's not what the court needs to do that, and the court has already argued that it is implicit there, and they can do whatever they like. That's not the way to restrain the court. What we need to do is to have a basic law legislation, or the judiciary, to arrange and formalize the relationship between the different arms, the judiciary and the legislature. And this law does not. The citizens of the State of Israel are not challenging the character of the State of Israel, and it would have accepted efforts to restrain the ability of the court to undermine the Jewish character of the state. I'd like to say a few words about how it all happened. What I find tragic in this whole argument is that it started with, on the postmodernist side, they said that Jewish and democratic is an internal paradox. It's not, of course. Nationalism and democracy are two sides of the same coin. I tell my students that the only way, the whole myth of the citizen of all the states, which doesn't exist, the only way to make Israel non-Jewish is to do away with democracy. As long as there is a Jewish majority and the right to vote for all, the State of Israel will remain Jewish in the sense that Shabbat will be its day of rest, unlike Sunday or Friday. Our calendar will be the Jewish holidays. Our language will be Hebrew. Our symbols and emblems will be drawn from Jewish history and heritage. It is a Jewish state. That's what happens when you have a free Jewish majority. If you look at if you study the development of the Zionist idea, it's based on the idea that nationalism is the path to liberation. And now the word, the term national liberation movements is being removed from our dictionaries, and I think that's a tragedy. Zionism was the national Jewish liberation movement that believed that the Jews should be like other nations that have a nation state, and Jewish and democratic, which enables a person to be itself. I don't have time to expand on that idea, but Jews were Jews in the closet. They were unable to show their Jewish identity in public places. What Zionism did is it allowed a person to be a Jew in his home and a Jew outside his home. And that's a very, very important thing, to be yourself. And that's what gives you the combination between democracy and Jewish identity. The right accepts the definition, seemingly accepts, that Jewish and democratic is a paradox, an internal paradox. So it says it has to be more national and be less democratic. We're losing the center that said that Judaism came from democracy because it is the right of self-determination. We're losing the rational discourse of democracy in favor of anti-liberal ultranationalism and anti-nationalist liberalism on the other side, and in the center is the national democracy that we need to defend. So I'll conclude with a brief remark after Tzipi Livni, that even those who think that the nation-state law will succeed in doing what Tzipi Livni thinks is behind it, and I think there are those who dream at night that the nation-state law will make it possible to do away with democracy so that we can annex people without giving them rights. It won't succeed at that either. All the different rights that have been ascribed to this law, I don't think they're possible. And for that reason, I don't think the problem was with the content of the law. The problem was with the law as a process, as an act that further polarizes the discourse between the Jewish and the Democratic, not because of its content, but rather in the way that it was used in the political struggle in Israel. I've always said I have no problem with the content, but perhaps the only thing where this law could perhaps fulfill a goal is that if the right wanted to screw the left because it was an excellent opportunity for the Labour Party to end up like whales on the beach. I told them what you did is you voted against what's in the law because what isn't in the law. I understand what you're saying should have been in the law, but as a Zionist party that's called the Zionist camp, you cannot vote against a law that establishes the Jewish character of the State of Israel.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gadi Taub. We will now move on to Haim Ramon, the former Vice Prime Minister. Haim, you can step up to the podium. You said... No, it's fine. Don't sit down. You can stand here. You said that the opposition's objection to the law is hypocrisy, ignorance, and small politics. Did I say that? Yes, I did. You even wrote it. I will repeat it as well. Tzipi Livni said here, she came this morning and she really spoke from the bottom of her heart. Is this small politics? Didn't you exaggerate? On principle, I always exaggerate. Thank you very much for inviting me. I would like to just say briefly something about Begin. Can I say that? Not at my expense? Can I say that? Okay, so I won't say if the clock's ticking. Okay, so at the expense of the break, okay, or the Q&A. Look, I read this law once, twice, 3 times. And I didn't understand what the big fuss is about. So I said, what, everyone is smart? Or rather, everyone is stupid and I'm clever? Of course, I'm the one who's wrong. So I read it again and again. I'm reading a text. I'm not reading about the text. I'm just reading the text itself. And then after 2 weeks, I became brave. And why did I suddenly become brave? Because I saw that a very clear voice that always speaks on these matters is silent. And this person is the president of the Supreme Court, the former president of the Supreme Court, Justice Aaron Barak. You have not heard him to this day object to the nation-state law. And why? Because if this law were to be legislated according to Aaron Barak's worldview, the formulation would have been even more strict or even more harsh, and it would have included things like a Jewish state where the Hebrew law plays a dominant role. As part of the compromises, this was taken out of the law. And so on and so forth examples. He said that. He didn't write it. He said it. He said it when he spoke in the Academy of Science. Listen, what he said about the Jewish settlement. A Jewish state is a state where the Jewish settlement in its cities and fields is a primary concern, which is much harsher than the law says, right? So I became brave, and I said, I don't understand. I am a central lefty, and I want to have a Jewish majority in the Jewish state. The entire Zionist idea is for the Jews to be a majority in the state of Israel. For me, it's the beginning and end of Zionism. A Jewish state is what kind of state will it be? You'll think it should be more religious, I'll think otherwise, and we can fight about the kind of country we'll have. Even Jabotinsky accepted it, and if there's time I'll quote him too. However, first and foremost, let's have a Jewish majority. And in the only place on the planet where we are a majority, that's where we, and we alone, the Jews, should have national rights. Full stop. Period. Now I'll tell you who made this up, who invented this. Until the mid-2000s, we didn't say nation-state. And then Tzipi Livni came along. I was then in the government with Sharon and with Ehud Olmert, and she drove us nuts. She demanded and she coined in discourse the term nation-state. And how did she get to that? And rightly so. She said, look, we are against the right of return for Palestinians to Israel. And justly so. Otherwise, we won't be a Jewish state with a Jewish majority. And if we annex, the same will be true, and we're going to fight about that a little later. And then she said, the right of return of Jews to the Jewish nation state, meaning the state of Israel, and a Palestinian right of return to a Palestinian state, and not here. And that's why there are two nation states. She invented this. And in the first clause, second clause, third clause, it doesn't really matter of the law. She would not have been able to formulate it better. That's what she wrote. That's what she wanted. And she was right in demanding that. And that's where it came from. Moreover, if I had gone back to the Knesset or been on the opposition when this law was passed, I would say, wonderful. Well done. This law is great. Because read the first clause. What does it say? It says the state of Israel, the land of Israel, is the historical place and homeland of the Jewish people. Wonderful, something amorphous. But where do we have rights? Only in the state of Israel do we have. The state of Israel is the realization of self-determination, not in the land of Israel, but in the state of Israel. What's the state of Israel? We're all Jews. The Green Line plus Jerusalem plus the Golan Heights. Right? The Golan Heights, you're gonna like that. Where do you live? You live in a place where the sovereign is the military commander. And I'm talking about the letter of the law. I'm not talking about a world outlook or a world view. This is the law. If the person who decides whether there's elections in your town is the military commander, we have to go to the IDF commander and ask them for permission to hold elections where you live. And that's the way it is. And you've been in power for many years. You've been in power for longer than you haven't been in power, and you're not annexing. So don't come to me. You are living outside Israel according to the right-wing government definition. Of course, you're living in Israel, in the land of Israel, but in terms of within the state of Israel, that's the only place where there is implementation of the law. And what does the right wing want? They want to annex everything so that the law will also be implemented there. But it's not happening, not even in the most right wing of governments, not even a millimeter is being annexed. Because then we would really be able to hold a true discussion. And that's why this law really is, and it's very basic, the left. I mean, the center-left should have been rejoicing over this law. They should have said, here, look, you yourselves are distinguishing between the state of Israel and the land of Israel. But they fell into the trap, and I will say that in a moment, politically speaking, about what Gadi said. I'll say that at the end. However, I am constantly trying to look for discrimination, to read the discrimination in the law. Where are we harming people's individual rights? I'm not talking about national rights. And there is a dispute in Israel. The anti-Zionist left want national rights in the state of Israel. If you read what they're writing, you will know that the Arab parties are saying it in the protest. They said as much. They want communal national rights in education and so on. And by the way, not the Druze, only the Arabs. And they're saying so. And I'm against that. That is what distinguishes between the Zionist left, or at least used to distinguish between the Zionist left and the non-Zionist left. The non-Zionist left want there to be national rights both for the Arab community or the Arab sector, and the Zionist left said no until the nation-state law. And this matter of equality really, really is one of the biggest nonsense. I don't want to attribute it to Tzipi Livni, but I heard her say that. First of all, there is equality. Tzipi Livni ahead of time said that any ruling by the Supreme Court is holy, is sacred, just like the Torah Council is for the Haredis. The same is true for the Supreme Court and in many sectors in the Jewish population, mostly in the left. They are like the secular council. And they're saying they determined that there will be equality. And where did they determine so? In the human dignity law. There is equality there, so we're not missing equality, right? It's not missing. So if I, again, were to be a narcissist and had I been in the Knesset, I would not have asked for it to be, for equality to be part of the basic law nation-state, because I just modestly helped this law to politically be passed in 1992. I didn't think I was revolutionary. I didn't think I was assisting a legal or a constitutional revolution. That's a different story. There was no equality there in human dignity. There was no equality, and everyone was so happy about it and rejoiced and said it was the best thing. And what is there in the basic law, human dignity and freedom? That all rights there stem from Israel being a democratic and Jewish state. So what do? In basic law, human dignity and freedom, they put in a lot of individual rights that apply to anyone who is a citizen of the state of Israel. That's one thing. But they did not address its Jewish essence. So what did the basic law nation-state do? It does not abolish basic law, human dignity and freedom. It just adds the Jewish aspect to the national nature. And that's what it did. And it did it very simply, with simple means. Who is arguing? Who is disputing this? With the Arabic language. I'm sorry, I have to say this at your expense. Arabic? If I were large, I would say, okay, fine, let it be equal status to Hebrew. But the status of Arabic is actually improved by this law. Why? Because it says that everything that remains, that has been legislated until now becomes a basic law. For instance, if the mayor of Jerusalem were to be a Kahana party member, and he would have wanted to take off all Arabic from all sides, he will not be able to do that because it's anchored in basic law. So it's even better than it was before. Everything becomes a basic law. And the same is true for other matters that I don't have the time to go into. That's why, and I'm really wrapping up and concluding, really, truly, I just want to say something political just to make you happy. If there is anything because of which the center-left will lose the elections, and not even in a small way, in a big way, is the ultra-Orthodox, the religious, right-wing bloc, and they will win like never before, to my great... because I find it fortunate, because they wanted to be a Jewish state, but they're annexing millions of Arabs, it will be because the borders will not be as clear anymore. The left Zionists were stupid enough to blur the line between left, that is non-Zionist, and Zionist, and they will be paying a high price in the ballot box because of that, unfortunately. Thank you very much, Haim Ramon. We will now hear from Yuval Diskin, the former head of the Israel Security Agency. Diskin wrote and said when talking about the basic law nation state as an act that is diabolical in terms of legislation, and we would be happy to hear from you and to hear you explain your opinion. And again, we want to ask, didn't you exaggerate to say diabolical about this? Hello, one and all, and thank you for inviting me to take part in this very distinguished forum. But I am not here to make people feel happy and pleasant. I want to tell you what I really feel, because in my life I learned that it is best to look facts in the eye, because when you stop doing that, things that are quite unpleasant start happening for us all. So when Yifat wrote to me yesterday and explained to me, or expanded a little bit about the topic of today's session, she said that we must address what happened to the self-evident, to the obvious, and why a discussion on this law has become so extreme and populist. And I thought a little bit about what is self-evident. It sounds a little bit philosophical. What does self-evident mean? And of course, it has a lot to do with what your political and social views are, how you perceive the self-evident or obvious. And because we are here in the center of Begin's heritage, I can say quite knowingly that for Menachem Begin, the self-evident certainly was self-evident, because no way would such a basic law, where the combination of a Jewish and democratic state, and democratic includes equal to me, and the meaning of which is also equal, would have passed Menachem Begin. But who are Zev Jabotinsky, Menachem Begin, Benny Begin, Michael Eitan, Dan Meridor, and Mr. Rivlin, the President of the State of Israel, versus those in the right wing? I don't think people think enough of them anymore. And I also thought about, what is populism? I mean, that's also an interesting question. I've grown up on the definitions of populism, so I read all sorts of such definitions, and then I took the Wikipedia definition, and I will read it to you. In Hebrew, do you know what populism is? Hamonaut, that's the Hebrew term for populism. It's a nice word. So populism is a style in politics that targets the common people. I didn't like the words common people, but maybe the wider public, to obtain support from them by using simple, catchy messages. I agree with that. Populism targets its concerns and messages to the economic and social concerns of the public, and tends to offer magic solutions to huge problems. And that is exactly what I think about the basic law nation state. I like this definition because it really says the truth. The legislative process here was a populist and extreme act performed hastily and without without a national consensus, as was done with the scroll of independence. Why not do it with a proper, serious debate with a large national consensus? And I'll tell you why. Because this law was not really designed to strengthen and bolster Israel's being both Jewish and democratic. It is a law designed to poke in the eye anyone who is not a Jew and anyone who is not right-wing, and against the Supreme Court of Israel. That is how I perceive this law. And therefore, I was so angry with it, and I will continue and explain. During the Q&A, I will answer. Please don't disrupt me now. M.K. Benny Begin, whom I greatly appreciate because he's really honest and a true Democrat, and you can be a Democrat and a liberal just as he is, also on the right side, but not in the Likud center, of course. He wrote about this in a paper following the legislation of the nation-state law, that this is just unnecessary statements made by members of Knesset and also the Prime Minister, and being limited by trying to win the best patriot competition is making us humiliate and derogate democracy. And it is not just their ugly content and their bad motives, because they conceal their complexity. And he later on talked about the important steps made by the government of Netanyahu in order to do good things for the state of Israel. So here is a succinct way of saying that this law is not right by a person who always went against bad legislation. And as populism is defined, this law is offering a magic solution for a huge, fateful problem. How can we make sure that Israel remains Jewish and democratic? By abolishing the connection between it also being democratic. And we all understand and know the truth, but we are covering our eyes because we don't want to look the facts in the eye, because they are colliding with many other truths. The law will not ensure that Israel is Jewish. Only its Jewish majority will be able to preserve Israel's nature as a Jewish state. That is the true and complex and tough challenge with which we must grapple. How do we ensure a Jewish majority in the state of Israel? And after this introduction that talked about the populist aspect of the discussion around what is self-evident, I want to talk about a few other things. As I've said, this basic law has nothing to do, in my view, with the Jewish nation's right to the state of Israel, or about with the state being a Jewish homeland. Why? Because these things are all written almost perfectly in one of the most beautiful and moving documents that Zionism has ever come up with, which is the Scroll of Independence, Israel's Declaration of Independence, which defines the historical background for the Jewish people's rights to the state of Israel, the land of Israel, and also the essence, vision, and values of the state of Israel. So why do we need to legislate a basic law if these things are written so well and so clearly and beautifully in our Scroll of Independence? It's an interesting question. Why? Because it is a law that is designed to be well accepted by a certain population. It reflects a group of arrogant politicians that Benny Begin called the best patriot competition members, and they only legislated this law because they could, because they were in power and they could pass it in Knesset, so they did, without thinking about its meanings and its implications. Some of them woke up too late and said, "Oh wait, we forgot the Druze. What should we do with the Druze now?" And others forgot the Bedouins that also serve in the IDF, and others forgot all sorts of other implications this law has, because this law was not only given to those who serve. Equality in the state of Israel is given to all its citizens, whether they serve in the IDF or not. And somewhere along the way, the law tramples the Scroll of Independence, which to me and many others is the founding document of the resurrection of the state of the Jewish nation in this country, and it was formulated with a national consensus. Most of us, if not all of us, have been educated along it, and it allows even minorities who don't like the term Jewish state, but because of the other definitions contained in the Scroll of Independence, they can live with it reasonably well. And I have spoken to many of them, believe me, as part of my position and otherwise. So we cannot refrain from tough questions that the legislation of this law bring up. Is it appropriate for the Jewish nation, who are persecuted for thousands of years, to treat the minorities within its country as the Jews were treated in other countries? I will later answer all the questions that time allows. Does anyone believe? I'm happy that it annoys you, but listen to me all the way. Does anyone believe that we will be able to have a Jewish state by nature if we become a minority between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River? Can a Jewish minority that controls a Muslim majority that we are with our own two hands creating using such distorted basic laws also be democratic? I think that not. I say no to all of these three questions. Only a Jewish majority within the borders of the State of Israel will allow Israel to continue being a Jewish state. Because as soon as we become a minority that controls a majority, the moral basis will no longer be our foundation. That will be the beginning of the end of this wonderful enterprise that is called the Jewish and Democratic State of Israel. And from here, I will move on to the next question or the next issue that to me is the most problematic in this populist act of legislation. And that is the decision to remove from the formulation equal rights to all citizens of Israel, regardless of gender and race and religion. And I would like to quote Aharon Barak, based on Menachem Alon, the Supreme Court Justice. And he said that the Scroll of Independence says that the Bible is the most basic books of the State of Israel. And the prophecy of Israel's Jewish prophets are the basis. And it is the state where Hebrew law or Jewish law plays a big role, a Jewish state where the values of the Torah of Israel and the heritage of the Jewish people and Jewish law are its primary basic values. And one of its basic values is that God created man in his image, male and female, as it says in Genesis. That is the verse that Jewish law derives values from, according that says that all men are created equal. And we, the Jews, who were persecuted because of racism and bigotry, who are suffering from anti-Semitism, 6 million of whom were assassinated and murdered by the Nazis and their allies, just because they were Jews, we will be the ones to exclude equality as a characteristic of the State of Israel, the nation, the state of the Jewish people? Should our constituent assembly in the State of Israel, the nation, the assembly of the nation that should be a light unto the nations, they should refrain from putting equality into their basic law? Another argument that is brought up, and I'm stopping now. Another argument that emerges is that this basic law strengthens the Supreme Court versus the right of return. But people have explained it already. The right of return to the State of Israel was not given to the citizens of the State of Israel. It was given to the Jews who are not the citizens of Israel. Should they want to realize their right to be a citizen of this country, which is their safe haven anywhere. This right has already been tested by Bagash, it has been put to the test by Bagash, by the High Court of Justice, and it only gives, it is only given to Jews. And once we cross, aside from that, we're talking about equality fully. So this law tries to undermine everything we've had so far in Zionism, including the Scroll of Independence, as a part of an intentional process to erase the heritage of Zionism, to erase the basic law of human dignity and freedom and the basic law of freedom of employment and work, and there's nothing good about it. It doesn't bolster our hold of the State of Israel and the land of Israel. It doesn't make our country more Jewish. It just makes the synthesis between Israel being a Jewish and democratic state crumble, because we need equal rights. And I would like to end with a very short anecdote. A friend of mine who is currently in the United States told me, and he heard it from his friend, that he walked around in a small town in New Jersey and he saw a stand there on the street where they were selling hats that said, "Make America Great Again." Nice, national, patriotic, let's say. And when he came in, and when he got closer, he saw that the Confederation flags are also sold in the same stand, and also swastika rings. And then he said to me, in the same stand, you can see for $1.99 the entire road from patriotism to ultranationalism to racism. So when we start going down the slippery slope, it happens very fast when the conditions are right. And therefore, I would propose, first of all, I hope that this law will not be invalidated by the High Court of Justice, but rather by the Knesset. And also, I hope that instead of this law, the scroll of independence will be bolstered, and because that really is the document that should be guiding star. And if they don't do that, at least accept the 5 words that Benny Begin wanted to add to the basic law nation state that make sure that there's equal rights for all Israeli citizens. Thank you very much. In order to protect the civil rights, we gave you more time, so thank you very much for what you've said.
Now for the last speaker in this round, to Attorney Tzvi Hauser, former Cabinet Secretary. Hauser recently said, very recently, that a single word is missing in the law, the word democratic, and that's interesting. Are we seeing the first cracks among people who led the law? Okay. Good afternoon. What an introduction. Cracks in the wall. Heaven forbid. Democratic. I will relate to that. I'll relate to that in the context of my remarks. At first, I was happy to see the heading of this session, What Happened to the Self-Evident? And after I delved into it a bit and I said, what am I going to say here today? I concluded that the self-evident has for a long time not been self-evident, and perhaps we're living in a bubble, both from right and left, conservatives and liberals. All are unified by certain basic principle, the Zionist principle, that there is something that is self-evident here. The doubts, and Happy as he was always doubtful, if I'm not mistaken, it says, the first doubts regarding the self-evident, I personally started having somewhere in the mid-'80s as a high school student, 11th or 12th grade, in a fascinating discourse or argument between two well-known writers, a Jewish and Arab writer, both of who spoke outstanding Hebrew, Aleph Bet Yoshua and Anton Shamas. I don't know which of you are familiar with that discussion. It appeared originally in Kol Ha'ir, a local paper in Jerusalem that not everybody is familiar with, and then to another platform, I think that no longer exists, a magazine called Moznaim. And Anton Shamas, who is a writer whose Hebrew awakens envy, he has a clear, proud Palestinian identity challenged the Israeli left, which embraces the Palestinians very bluntly and said the state of Israel has to undergo a new formation, what might be called in other places the Second Republic, and this needs to be a binational state. We're talking about within the Green Line, or what we call a state of all its citizens. And in view of these words, Aleph Bet Yoshua answered angrily, and this argument. I went through with 3 articles, long articles, essays on from each of the authors that concluded with an unequivocal and some might call a blunt statement on the part of Anton Shamas and of Aleph Bet Yoshua. And Anton Shamas said, if so, take your things and move 100 meters to the right. Anton Shamas lives in Jerusalem, and Aleph Bet Yoshua said that Anton Shamas should move 100 meters to the right to eastern Jerusalem, where he believed the Palestinian state should be established, where the right to self-determination of the Palestinian people should be realized. And that story began quietly and reverberated quite widely, and many people were shocked by the unequivocal bluntness of Aleph Bet Yoshua, who perhaps they thought should have perhaps narrowed the claques. But in my opinion, that was the point where I distinguished or noticed the crack or rift or the unraveling of the self-evident. There are 2 types of splitting offs. There's a V type, and forgive me for using non-Hebrew letters at a time when we're talking about the nation-state law, which declared that Hebrew is the official state. So there's the V split and the T split. The difference between them is when you notice that the split has occurred, when you lost track. When do you start getting lost? When your compasses start to become confused. With the T-split, it's very clear. You turned right when you should have turned left, and right away you understand that there's either right or left. With a V-split, you don't see it so clearly. You move ahead more, you're moving more or less in the same direction. And I think perhaps that in the state of Israel, somewhere in the 1980s, and I think the First Lebanon War was a trigger, and some say it already started in the Yom Kippur War in '73, but that's when that V-split began, which signifies a crisis in collective identity, which is asking, what are we doing here? And that means that the self-evident is no longer self-evident. And my good friend, a gentleman of with an enormous record in the security of the state of Israel, Yuval Diskin, I think he's still at that V-split. Many good people, Tzipi Livni, who was here earlier, they are still marching in the right direction, but there is a deviation. But you can swallow it, you can accept it, you can agree to it, you can dwarf it, you can diminish it. What am I talking about? The filtering down in Israeli society of ideas that are defined academically as what I would call, in sterile academic language, post-Zionists, those ideas are taking a clear, distinct role. The post-Zionist thesis is not alien to the Middle East. We should know where we're coming from and take the comprehensive picture. The principle, the cold principle of the right to the self-determination or the recognition of the Jewish people as a nation and not as a religious group is a principle that is not accepted by almost anyone in the Arab world. Most of the time, they do not recognize the Jewish people as a people or as a nation, and therefore they do not recognize the right of the Jewish people to self-determination. This position is not that important, perhaps. Perhaps we don't care what people think about us in Egypt and Morocco, but it is important in the ethnic conflict that has been taking place here in the past 100 years. And I can tell you that for years I fulfilled various public roles, and I was at the heart of the discussions with the Palestinians. On the Palestinian side, our peace partners, as it were, there is an absolute consensus that is clearly grounded that there is no recognition of Judaism as a nation with a right to self-determination. Time passes quickly. And it's not just the Middle East and not just the Palestinians. Here in Israel, we're seeing the same process filtering down. In the year 2006, those conceptual ideas of Anton Shamas for the first time took on a clear argument in what was called the vision documents of Arab society, 2006-7, 3 documents, the most important one of which is by the central representative body of Israeli Arabs, the Supreme Monitoring Committee of Israeli Arabs, together with the heads of Arab local governments. They created a document to which 2 additional documents were added, and they challenged the seemingly self-evident process, which already then was not self-evident, and Shams placed a clear question mark on it, on the concept of equality in the state of Israel. And those representatives of a national minority, and they're not just mumbling, the political representation is, this is not, so this is their official position. There's no evasion, there's no equivocation, and they say very clearly, no more civil and human rights, equality in those rights. We want what we demand in other places, collective political rights, because they claim Israeli Arabs are a native national minority, and therefore they demand essential bilingualism, not on a sign somewhere Arab, but like in Canada, that everything must be in Hebrew and in Arabic. They're talking about educational, religious, and cultural autonomy with no intervention whatsoever on the part of the Jewish government in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian society. They're talking about equality, in symbolic equality. For example, in Israel's flag, even if Britain or Scandinavia have crosses on their flags, the Star of David should no longer be the symbol of the state of Israel. There should be some kind of neutral symbol instead. And most importantly, equality in immigration and citizenship. Yes, that immigration rights are the collective right of Israeli Arabs. And there should be a collective allocation of land and so on and so forth. This V is growing. Now, the reverberations of these ideas, some of them, part of them, are reverberating significantly in the academia. And my dear friend Gadi, Dr. Gadi Taub from the Hebrew University can confirm this. And we're also hearing the reverberation in certain rulings of the Supreme Court and also in certain political theses and regarding the strategic mistake that was made immediately after the Holocaust by the countries of the world by recognizing Judaism as a nationality and recognizing the right of national self-determination by the Jewish people. And the Palestinians, this is the root of the disagreement and of the conflict, not land, not borders and so on. There is no mutual Palestinian recognition of 2 nation states, a Palestinian nation state and a Jewish nation state, the nation state of the Jewish people and of the Palestinian people. Among the moderates on the Palestinian side, there's recognition of a Palestinian nation state and a binational Jewish-Palestinian state. And when you press them, and you can't, they say you can't demand Abu Mazen recognize the nation state of a Jewish state. And he says, you can define yourselves the way you like, and we'll define you the way that. And when the state of Israel gathers and convenes to define itself as the nation state of the Jewish people. And we saw what happened. I know that I'm over my time, so I'll conclude now. The decision of 2018 was made at the last moment. We're not in a comfortable position that we can just go on the way we were. It happened at the last moment for two main reasons. First of all, the complete loss of trust in Israeli society that is just growing worse and doesn't enable us to reach consensus on basic principles. Those who look at the legislation here, there's a lack of trust on both sides. Those who say that we need to talk about equality, then the court will come and steal a position. And so I do not believe in the other side, and it's clear to me that the introduction of certain words would be stealing it. And the other side says when they talk about a nation state, they're taught about annexing without giving rights. And we can't reach any consensus on anything. This is the last moment to get any kind of agreement on anything. And the second thing is international intervention. The system that opposes the realization of the right to self-determination on the part of the Jewish people is using various parties, and in a different international atmosphere, pressure will be exerted on Israel not to pass such a law, with equality, without equality, with democratic, without democratic. I'm going to get punished that I didn't relate to the question. So looking at the basic law, human freedom and dignity by analogy, and look what the court did with that law, you see that the text is very mediocre. And the nation-state law, that text could also have been better. I have a new comment, and I'm going back to what was said earlier. If the words Jewish and democratic, that the skies wouldn't have fallen, it could have been included, but that's a very minor discussion. Even without that word and without those improvements or changes, the glass is far more full than empty regarding this law. And any Zionist who is against the nation-state law will find himself in the future or in a perspective of time on the wrong side of history. And I regret that, because it would have been far better to pass this law with a consensus as wide as possible. But the fact that things are not discussed in principle in Israeli politics led to Zionists not supporting this law. This is a historic mistake, and it's a terrible thing. Everyone, even those who supported the law, should mourn that. But the dust will settle, the tumult will quiet, and Israel has completed an important, basic, essential, fundamental chapter in its identity. When we are still in the 70th year of Israel's existence, still its founding generation, and we must look forward and see in the future how the basic principles of the state of Israel will be seen as a Jewish and democratic state. Thank you very much to Tzvi Hauser. We'll have now an attempt. I need your cooperation. We will take a few questions from the audience. I don't think more than 3 in light of the short time we have here. I really, really ask you that the questions not be lectures, but questions with a question mark that are formulated very briefly. Dr. Mordechai Kedar. How is equality interpreted? Does that include Arabs enlisting in the army, for example? I'm sorry, I can't hear him because he's not speaking into a microphone. Could you ask him, please, to have a microphone given to the questioner? Or have the moderator repeat the question, please. Are there any other women in the audience?
תודה, שאלה אובנן, כן, בבקשה. שאלה אחרונה, רגע, תהיו בבקשה בשקט.
We've taken the questions, and what I suggest now is that you choose which questions you'd like to respond to. Everyone can choose one question, and first of all, we know what equality is for Yifat, women first. So, why are you applauding, for goodness sake? I will respond, first of all, to Moti regarding the matter of equality. I think that what we're seeing here is a kind of formalistic use against the use of the word equality. I think equality is something that is commonsensical, and there are always exceptions. Why? Because you can't. What is equality if people don't have the same amount of money? So we assume that there should be a commonsensical interpretation. So it's internally the question is not whether the interpretation. We know how the court is going to interpret it. Of course we don't want to say there's going to be inequality in the state of Israel. And I suggested using the word without derogating from the rights of the minorities. I don't think there are too many people who would say, yes, we want to derogate from the rights of the minorities. And now you would say, if it appears in the Constitution, then the courts will say that that Arabs need to serve in the law because otherwise it harms the minorities. It should all be the way that the interpretation serves the interests of common sense. I don't think anyone, if you're trying to twist the meaning, you can do whatever you like, as we saw with the matter of when Balad entered the Knesset against, although they're against the existence of the state of Israel. I see, Yuval, the head of the They know how to identify processes. There's 6 heads of the former heads of the ISA and they said that we are becoming a apartheid state. I don't know where you took that for, and bigoted and so on. I don't understand where in this law it says anything that harms minorities, because the word equality doesn't appear. I'm sorry that it doesn't appear there, but only for tactical reasons. The basic law already includes the issue of equality. These are chapters or clauses of a constitution. It doesn't have to be repeated in every line. It didn't happen. So I find myself in a strange situation. People in Israel, I need to explain to them that isn't what happened. Israelis need to know that on their own, because it's clear that that's true. The problem for me is only one of diplomacy or public relations, as it were. We've shot ourselves in the foot by giving more fuel to those who want to call us an apartheid state. Why do they say we're an apartheid state? They show Arabs waiting at road blocks in the territories, and they say this is what they do to the Arabs. And now they're saying, look, it says in the nation-state law it's exclusive to the Jewish people, but there are Arab citizens too, and it's discriminatory. But that's demagoguery, and I'm surprised at people who know the truth, who know what happens in the state of Israel, who thinks that it's going to change anything here regarding the rights of minorities. That is why the question of equality, and there was good reason, I think Haim mentioned the word equality doesn't appear in the basic law of freedom and human dignity. Some people are paranoid. It's a word that's loaded and you can't ignore it. But if it appeared, for example, in the basic law, Jewish and democratic, that appears in the other basic laws, and it would neither add nor detract, then it would at least create the same overall harmonious statement. I suspect that even then, those who are opposed today would continue to be opposed. It wouldn't really move people from opposition to support, but it would make it possible to hold among the supporters of the law a discussion that is far more better grounded or better established and fairer, and include the deep understanding that there is no basic law without a yearning for consensual broadening of the consensus. Yuval was attacked here, and he was criticized both from the audience and in claims also here from Gadi, so I think it would only be fair to give him an opportunity to respond. So I will try to relate to some of the remarks. I'll ignore my good friend Moti from Bar Ilan about the Islamic movement and the ISA. I think that was just a provocation. But Yuval, the question, is it equality only of duties or only of rights? Do all Jews in the state of Israel fulfill all their duties? That's my question. The Minister Shaked gave a legal lecture of the highest quality, so go to the former president of the Supreme Court, Aaron Barak, and he explained how you live in a democracy. And in a democracy, sometimes you concede or you diminish to a certain extent certain rights in order to be able to live together. And that is why I think that the principle should first be that there must be full, equal civil rights. Heaven forbid, I don't plan to allow the Arab minority in Israel to define the identity of the State of Israel. And that we can do, and I repeat once again, only when we are a majority here in Israel. Otherwise, we'll have a big problem. You can pass as many laws as you like, and you won't resolve that problem. That's one thing. So let's see how we maintain the Jewish majority in the state of Israel. Secondly, in a democracy, when we want to assure equality in human rights, civil rights, we have to know how to give in here and there so that we can live together. That's the essence of democracy, and that's why it was so important, and it's not a matter, a tactical issue, as Dr. Taub said, or as Hauser says, that it perhaps would be more harmonious. That's a synthesis that cannot be dismantled. Jewish and democratic are one and the same, and we need to connect them. If we leave out one of them, the other one cannot exist. That's how I see it. The word democratic doesn't appear in the Declaration of Independence, but we all know what the essence of democracy is, and that appears there without the word democratic. And as for the question that the gentleman from the audience asked, why didn't the law, basic law of freedom, human freedom and dignity, why didn't I express opposition? Because the word equality doesn't appear there. In my opinion, the Declaration of Independence is like a charter for the State of Israel, and from that, all the other things should have been. That was also the intention of the founding generation, and I cannot ignore the fact. And if in the law, in the nation-state law, and if the words that Benny Begin had added to the basic state law, I probably wouldn't be here and I wouldn't have said anything about the matter. I cannot ignore the fact that there is a process that is going on here from a number of different directions. The nation-state law, from which the issue of democracy and equality were deliberately removed. Secondly, you asked me a question, so let me answer. Secondly, the attempt to weaken the basic law, human freedom and dignity, was also weakened, and it also was also an attempt. This is also an attempt to weaken the Supreme Court. If you recall, you know, those drawings where you would change one line each time, and suddenly you'd have a picture of a dog. That's what's happening here. I'd like to have some of the appreciation that you got here. That's why I interrupted. Let me explain to you afterwards how it's done. I'd like to say a word about equality. The state of Israel does not draft Arabs into the army. It should. The law that we so want to apply to ultra-Orthodox should apply to Arabs as well. What difference does it make? They didn't write equality. It wasn't for that reason. When we passed in 1992 basic law, human freedom and dignity, Amnon Rubinstein and Uri and Lin were the leaders, and the ultra-Orthodox came. I worked very hard to have them support the law, and they said, we don't want the word equality in there, and we don't want freedom of speech. Why? I asked. It's not because of the Arabs, they said, and it's not because of the other minorities. It's because of the Reform Jews. We don't want them to have equality. It wasn't about women. You may know something else that I do, but I'm telling you what they told me. Not what you think they said. That's what they said. And then I said to them, okay, what about freedom of speech? They said, we don't want missionaries to be able to speak freely in Israel. Those were their two arguments. I went to Amnon and Uriel Lin. So I said, either pass the law without that, or you won't be able to pass the law at all. Because the ultra-Orthodox had a veto because we were in the opposition. And they agreed. And they said that they trusted the Supreme Court, and that's why we have equality in Israel. So all the talk about equality is meaningless. What is equality? The law of basic freedom and dignity, it says democratic state, and it says only citizens, because of course there's discrimination between citizens and non-citizens, but all citizens are equal before the law and before the government. So that law said, we want to know, what does it mean to be Jewish? We know there's Shabbat and there's language and there's holidays, but the most important thing is that there are national rights here. That is the thing that is most meaningful to us. Why? In the nation-state law. Why only for Jews? Because we want to be in the one place in the wall in the nation-state of the Jewish people. If you are an Arab and you want to live in an Arab nation-state, not here. But if you want to live as an equal citizen, you can live here and you'll get all the rights coming to you, but not equality. Your self-determination will have to be elsewhere. So Yuval mentioned Benny Begin, and I like Benny Begin very much, but I have a problem with him. He has no problem, and many of the people here, to talk a lot about democracy and Jewish nationhood, and to control 2.5 million people who don't have political rights. There's no such situation elsewhere in the world where people cannot vote for their central government. In democracies, that is. Not even in non-democracy. In North Korea, they vote. They're told what to vote for, but they vote. I've argued with enough right-wing people. They bring me all kinds of islands. Don't argue with me. There is no such place. But Benny Begin has no problem with equality, and he wants, and many others wants, that 2.5 million people continue to live forever without rights. So this is my last one. But that's not the discussion here. That's not the discussion here. The discussion is collective equality of rights. I said that I'm opposed to there being national rights in the state of Israel, which is defined as what? For a nation that is not Jewish. And that's why I'm against to the non-Zionist left period. That's what I'm against. But you can't simultaneously be such a Democrat inside the state of Israel while you're controlling 2.5 million people forever without giving them political rights and saying, I'm in favor of human freedom and dignity. They also have dignity. Thank you. We have completed this session. The next session will start at 1:10 after lunch.